The doorbell rings. I open it to find Linda Prescott, the HOA president, holding a clipboard and demanding $3,500 for violations on my property. Apparently my mailbox isn't the right shade of brown, and the garden roses are too vibrant for the neighborhood. My wife, Emma, doesn't flinch. "No," she says, and that's when things take a turn. Linda immediately calls the cops. When the officer arrives, his face turns white. "Wait," he stammers, looking at Emma. "You're the judge?" Linda's smug smile disappears. She has no idea what's coming next. This game is about to get a lot bigger. Linda Prescott strutted up to our door like she owned the place. She was all business, clipboard in hand, wearing a navy blazer that screamed, "I'm in charge." She looked at me with a smug, practiced smile, then turned to Emma like she was speaking to an inferior. "I'm Linda Prescott, president of the Meadowview Heights HOA," she said, as if we should bow down. "Your property is in violation of several community standards. The fine totals $3,500. I was about to speak up when Emma stepped forward, calm as ever. "Which specific community standards are we violating exactly?" she asked, her voice steady but sharp. Linda froze for a moment, clearly unprepared for the legal challenge. Well, your mailbox isn't the right color. Your roses are too bright for the neighborhood, and your landscaping doesn't match the approved design." Emma didn't bat an eye. "That's it?" Linda's confidence faltered as she rattled off more violations, but it was clear she was just pulling numbers out of thin air. The longer Emma stood there, cool and composed, the more Linda's fake authority slipped. "Look," Emma said, "you don't have the legal authority to impose these fines unless they're ratified by a board vote. Show me the paperwork." Linda's smile dropped. She didn't have anything. She wasn't ready for a federal judge's questions, and she definitely wasn't ready for the fight that was about to come. The first sign that things were getting worse came a week later. I was working from home, typing away at my desk, when I heard the unmistakable sound of a clipboard tapping against the door. Emma answered it again. She's always been the calm one, the one who can handle any situation with a steady breath. It was Linda again, with the same self-assured demeanor, as if she was in complete control. "I'm here for an inspection," she announced, stepping into our yard without waiting for an invitation. "Inspection," Emma repeated, eyebrow raised. Linda barely glanced at her as she started walking around the yard. "I'm conducting a routine check on all the properties to make sure they comply with the new guidelines. Your roses are still too bright, and the fence doesn't have the right coating." "Right," Emma said, her voice even. "And the HOA approved these changes?" She knew the answer was no, and Linda knew that Emma knew. Linda paused, her eyes flickering, then continued inspecting as if nothing had been said. "You're still in violation. Expect another fine in the mail." She turned and left as abruptly as she had arrived, but this time there was a shift. The power dynamic was changing. Linda was pushing, and Emma wasn't backing down. The next day, things got more personal. I had just returned from a meeting when I saw Linda's car parked in front of our house again. I stepped inside, and Emma was sitting at the kitchen table, fuming. "I just found her in our backyard taking pictures of the fence," Emma said, seething. "She's trying to prove more violations. She's crossing a line." I looked out the window. Linda was standing near our backyard fence, snapping photos as if it were a crime scene. I could feel my blood boil. This wasn't just about lawn care anymore. This was personal. I walked out to the yard, my voice sharp. "What do you think you're doing?" Linda turned, her eyes narrowing. "I'm documenting your continuous violations. There are multiple things wrong with this property, and now you're blocking the sidewalk with that storage shed." I glanced at the shed. It wasn't blocking anything. "You need permission to be on our property," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Linda smiled, that smug, "I know I'm right" smile that made my skin crawl. "I'm just doing my job. You'll hear from me soon." As she turned to leave, I could see it in her eyes. She was looking for a way to destroy us. She had crossed the line, and I knew that whatever came next wouldn't be about a mailbox or some flowers. She was after something bigger. The escalation came a few days later, when I noticed something wasn't right. The same set of officers that had visited us before showed up on our street again, and Linda was with them. This time, they didn't just park outside. they came to our door. I opened it to find Linda standing with Officer Bradley Johnson, a thick file under his arm. The tone had shifted dramatically, and I could sense the tension in the air. "I've received multiple complaints from neighbors," Officer Johnson began, his voice low. "There's been a breach of local regulations. It's not just about the mailbox and landscaping anymore. You've violated community rules regarding structural modifications." Emma, who had been standing beside me, froze. "What are you talking about?" Officer Johnson held up a set of photos, each one showing various parts of our property. "Your shed, your garage door, they don't meet code." I stared at the pictures. They were taken from the edge of our property line, showing angles I hadn't seen before. "You're accusing us of what?" "The shed is approved by the city. We've had no issues until now." Linda stepped forward, her voice dripping with condescension. "I'm afraid that's not what the HOA board says. This has all been documented. You have 72 hours to fix everything before further action is taken." "What action?" I snapped. "What are you really doing here, Linda?" She smiled, that same smug smile that made me want to tear her apart with words. "The next step involves legal procedures. This is only the beginning." As they left, Emma turned to me, her expression dark. "She's going too far. This is no longer about the house. She's trying to destroy us. We have to stop her." A few hours later, we received a notice in the mail, an official eviction notice. I stared at it in disbelief. The HOA was trying to force us out, claiming we were in violation of zoning laws. This wasn't just harassment. This was a full-on attack. I didn't know who to turn to, but Emma was already on the phone with our lawyer. By the time we'd gathered everything, Linda was back. She knocked on the door, and when we opened it, she was standing there with a new set of officials. 2 more officers, and a man I hadn't seen before. "Time's up," Linda said, her eyes gleaming with triumph. "The eviction will be enforced unless you comply with the fines. You have no choice." I could feel my pulse quicken as I realized what was happening. They were forcing us into submission with the threat of legal action and police intervention. "This is ridiculous," I said, taking a deep breath. "You can't just intimidate us into compliance." Officer Johnson, who had been silent until now, stepped forward. "It's more than fines now. The court will back us up." But before I could respond, Emma stepped forward, her tone calm but chilling. "We're not going anywhere, and you just made the mistake of trying to destroy the wrong family." The next 24 hours felt like they lasted years. We were caught in a web of legal threats, with no clear way out. Linda's demands were now escalating beyond fines. She was using the HOA board to declare us outcasts, creating false violations to force us to sell. But Emma was done playing by Linda's rules. She had started gathering her evidence, consulting legal experts, and even reached out to some of the neighbors who had been victimized by Linda in the past. When Linda returned the next day with another set of demands, I knew the fight was about to get much bigger. Linda wasn't just trying to push us out anymore, she was trying to break us. But this time, we were ready. Emma wasn't just protecting our home. She was preparing to expose everything Linda had done, from her manipulation to the illegal acts she'd used to force families into selling their homes. This was the point of no return. Linda had just made the mistake of pushing too far. Saturday's HOA board meeting was charged with tension. Linda Prescott wasn't just trying to win this time. She was fighting for her control, her reputation, and her illegal operations. As we walked into the community center, Linda stood at the front, ready for the confrontation, her usual cocky smile plastered on her face. I could feel her eyes on Emma as she entered the room. There was a brief moment of hesitation, then Linda quickly recovered, her smugness returning. "Mrs. Parker," Linda greeted, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "I hope you're ready to finally address the violations your property has accumulated." Emma stood tall, unfazed. "I'm here to ask questions about your authority to impose these fines," she said, "and why we haven't received any formal notice for the alleged violations." Linda paused, clearly unprepared for the legal challenge. "We've given you ample time," Linda snapped, though her voice was less confident now. But Emma wasn't backing down. "I've reviewed your HOA bylaws," Emma said calmly, "and nowhere does it grant you the authority to issue fines without a proper board vote. I'd like to see the documentation that proves your claim." Linda opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. The room felt like it was holding its breath. Linda's fake authority was crumbling, and everyone could see it. Emma didn't give Linda a chance to recover. In fact, Emma continued, I've gathered all the necessary documentation that proves your HOA is acting illegally. Here's a record of fraudulent fines, fabricated violations, and your failure to follow proper procedures. Emma placed the stack of papers on the table with deliberate precision, turning the tide in a single calculated move. Each document was carefully organized, showing exactly how Linda had manipulated the system to extort money from residents. Linda looked around the room, panic creeping into her expression. That's not possible, she stammered. But the board members weren't looking at Linda anymore. They were looking at the evidence Emma had laid out, proof that Linda wasn't just a bad HOA president. She was a criminal. Emma continued, her voice steady but laced with authority. These fines are based on false claims, and I've also uncovered evidence that the HOA has been violating state law for months. Linda, your entire operation is built on fraud. This isn't just bad management. It's illegal. The room was dead silent. Linda's face twisted in anger, but I could see the cracks forming. She wasn't the fearless leader anymore. She was the one in the hot seat. The moment that sealed Linda's fate came from an unexpected source. Tom Rodriguez, the board member we had been working with, stood up, his voice cutting through the tension. I've been part of the HOA for years, Tom said firmly, and I can tell you, there has never been a board vote on these fines. And Linda, I've seen the records. You've been falsifying documents and taking money from residents without authorization. Linda's face went pale. You're lying, she spat, but it was too late. The truth had been laid bare, and Tom wasn't backing down. He continued, I'm not going to sit by while you destroy people's lives. It's time for this to end. The other board members shifted uncomfortably, realizing they had been complicit in Linda's scams. One by one, they began to look at each other, some avoiding eye contact, others realizing the gravity of what was happening. Emma took a step forward, her voice calm but unwavering. I'm requesting that all fines be suspended and that Linda's actions be investigated by the State Oversight Board. I'm also filing a formal complaint with the federal authorities. Linda's face contorted with rage. You can't do this, she screamed, but her voice lacked the power it once had. Emma nodded once, her gaze unwavering. I already have. As the board meeting descended into chaos, Linda was left standing there, defeated and exposed. The facade of her authority shattered in front of everyone. The residents who had been too afraid to speak up were now emboldened, and the shift was palpable. Linda had underestimated Emma. She had no idea that her arrogance would be her downfall. As we walked out of the meeting room, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Linda had pushed too far. Emma had won, and in doing so, she had exposed a criminal enterprise hiding in plain sight. This wasn't just about our house anymore. It was about the entire community reclaiming their lives. Linda had made the mistake of messing with the wrong people. And now, there was no going back. The aftermath of that meeting felt surreal. As Linda stormed out of the room, her face a twisted mask of fury and disbelief, I realized how much had changed in the span of a few hours. The air was thick with tension, but there was also something else, relief. Linda's reign of terror was finally over. We walked back to our car, the weight of everything that had just happened starting to settle. I could feel Emma's calmness, the kind of satisfaction that only comes from executing a plan with precision. As we pulled out of the parking lot, I noticed the neighbors who had been too scared to speak up now standing on their porches watching us as if they had just witnessed a miracle. Did you see Mrs. Powell? I asked Emma, pointing to the elderly neighbor who had always been terrified of Linda. She was standing outside, nodding in approval. I did, Emma replied, a faint smile touching her lips. This wasn't just for us. It was for all of them. For the first time since we moved in, the community didn't seem so divided. Linda had manipulated and intimidated these people for years, but now they were standing together. As we drove through the neighborhood, I saw small changes everywhere. Neighbors talking to one another again, helping each other with their lawns, and even sharing a laugh. The atmosphere had shifted from fear to solidarity. The legal consequences came swiftly. Linda's fate was sealed the moment we exposed her. After Emma filed the federal complaint and presented the evidence, everything spiraled into motion. The State Oversight Board launched an investigation, and soon after, Linda was arrested. The charges ranged from fraud and conspiracy to civil rights violations. Officer Greg Morris, the corrupt cop who had backed Linda, wasn't spared either. The investigation into Linda's HOA activities uncovered a far deeper corruption: bribery, illegal foreclosures, and a system of intimidation run by Linda and Morris. Morris was arrested on charges of conspiracy and civil rights violations, facing federal charges that would likely keep him behind bars for decades. His career as a cop was over, but it didn't end there. The other members of the HOA board, who had blindly followed Linda, were also investigated. Some were removed from their positions, while others faced charges for their role in enabling Linda's scam. For the first time, the residents of this neighborhood realized they had power. Power to stand up to the people who had been controlling their lives. As Linda was led away in handcuffs, I felt a strange sense of closure. The woman who had made our lives miserable, who had tried to steal our home and our peace of mind, was finally getting what she deserved. The community had already started to rebuild, but there was one final piece of the puzzle. The next HOA meeting was different. This time, the residents filled the room, not in fear, but with a sense of purpose. Tom Rodriguez, who had risked his own position to expose Linda, was elected as the new interim HOA president. His first act was to announce that the HOA would be restructured entirely. There would be no more bullying, no more fabricated violations. The association would be focused on community building, not extorting money from its members. As Emma and I sat in the back of the meeting, watching the new leadership take shape, I realized just how much had changed. The entire dynamic of the neighborhood had shifted. It wasn't just about us anymore. It was about everyone who had suffered under Linda's rule. The residents were taking control of their own lives again, and for the first time, they felt like a real community. I turned to Emma, watching her as she looked around the room, her face serene but full of quiet pride. She had done this. She had single-handedly brought down an entire criminal enterprise, not with power or force, but with knowledge, patience, and strategic thinking. "Thank you," I said, my voice filled with gratitude. "You didn't just protect us. You protected all of them." Emma looked at me, her eyes warm. "I did what needed to be done. But this is just the beginning." As we left the meeting, the sun had set, casting a warm golden glow over the neighborhood. It felt like a new beginning. The street, once tense with fear, now felt alive with the promise of a fresh start. People waved at each other as they worked on their lawns, their faces filled with hope. The world felt right again. And as for Linda, well, she learned the hard way that you don't mess with the wrong person, especially when that person has the law on their side.